Hi, I'm Matthew Temple, Harvard Class of '86 and Director of Alumni Career and Professional Development. And I'd like to welcome everyone today to Harvard Alumni Association's Reinventing Your Career webinar. And I know we've got people tuning in today from Austria and the Ivory Coast, Colorado and California. So thank you all for joining us today. We're going to touch on a couple of topics today, talking about some examples of people who've reinvented their career, and we'll talk a little bit about the process of reinventing your career, starting with self-assessment, research. We'll talk a little bit about networking, and we'll cover a couple of other topics, including working identity. And we'll have time at the end for Q&A. In fact, as we go to our next slide, we've got 5 people on the slide here. And what I'd like you to do at home is in your chat box, type in the names of who you see on the screen. This is your first test of the day. We'll see how you do. So we're starting to get some answers in now. So one person said Magic Johnson. That's correct. Who else do you see on the screen there? There's a Harvard alum as well, Al Franken. Someone else is typing in Oprah Winfrey. And we're seeing Arnold Schwarzenegger. And does anyone know our mystery guest in the bottom left-hand corner? Come on, you all went to Harvard. You should be pretty smart. All right, I'm not seeing any answers yet. So we'll come back to our mystery guest. And the next question as well, when you look at all these people, what do they have in common? And someone was just typing in, they all reinvented their careers, and that's correct. So when we go to our next page, we see Al Franken, who was a Harvard alum. I think it was class of '75. And so his first job coming out was actually writing for Saturday Night Live. He was one of the original writers for Saturday Night Live. He did the Stuart Smalley character. And then he reinvented his career. In fact, one of the things he started to do was write books about politics. He also was on Air America, liberal radio show, and then became senator from Minnesota. He's been senator since about 2008, so he's someone who actually reinvented his career as well. When we go to our next slide, Magic Johnson. So I'm actually a Celtics fan, so it was tough for me to put this example up. So Magic Johnson was a Los Angeles Laker. They won 5 titles in their first 9 years, but also reinvented his career as well. After basketball, he became a very, very successful businessman. He actually owned the first Starbucks franchise in the United States, Magic Johnson Theaters, Magic Johnson Clinics. He owned Fatburger for a while. A lot of real estate, part owner of the Lakers, and then part owner of the Los Angeles Dodgers. And in his spare time, he actually does broadcasting his games as well. Oprah Winfrey. So Oprah actually started her career as a TV reporter. In fact, started in Chicago at AM Chicago. I grew up in Chicago. And had her own show for 25 years, from 1986 to 2011. And really became a brand and an empire under herself. So there's Oprah Magazine. Became a billionaire. She's a benefactor. In fact, I was just at the Smithsonian African American Museum in Washington, D.C. She gave $20 million to the museum. And in fact, from going from her own talk show, she actually has her own network, the Oprah Winfrey Network. Our next guest, Arnold Schwarzenegger. So you might think of him first as a movie star, but I would actually argue Arnold's had more career reinventions than that. In fact, he probably requires 6 different photos. His first career was actually as a bodybuilder. He was Mr. Universe, the Austrian Oak, for about, I think he had 6 or 7 Mr. Universe titles. His first picture was Pumping Iron. They didn't really give him a lot of speaking parts. Then Conan the Barbarian, still not too many speaking parts. Then became the Terminator, Kindergarten Cop, very successful businessman. Someone I know is actually on the other side of him in a real estate transaction. She may actually be one of the few people who's tougher than Arnold Schwarzenegger. Was governor of California for 7 years, went back to movies, and now is hosting The Apprentice, which has not been getting very good reviews from the White House, apparently. Finally, our mystery guest is Paul Gauguin. And Paul Gauguin also reinvented his career. In fact, his first career, he was actually in the French merchant marine for a number of years. And then his second career, he actually became a banker and a stockbroker in Paris. He then became interested in drawing and art. And he really didn't have the talent at that point, so he started taking classes. He started taking classes on nights and weekends. He began drawing more on the weekends. As he became better and better, he spent more time, moved to Brittany, began painting there, and then finally went to Tahiti and had his transition complete. So at this time, you're probably thinking, that's great, but what about people who aren't famous and aren't dead? What about normal people who've reinvented their careers? And we're going to talk through some examples of them as well. And when you think about career reinvention, there's a number of different ways to think about it. For some people, career reinvention is maybe less subtle at the beginning. They may actually just be switching sides within a profession. So you might have someone, let's say, in equity research who switched from the sell side to the buy side. And then you might have someone else who may have started off in advertising and then switched to marketing. Or even lawyers. You'll see someone going from a law firm to becoming in-house counsel, general counsel. And so these are career reinventions that may not be as radical. People are actually leveraging many of the skills they have already, but essentially just switching sides. Something that might be a little bit more of a career reinvention would be someone who might be switching industries. So maybe they went from consumer packaged goods to technology, or maybe from manufacturing to financial services. So they still may be using a lot of their day-to-day skill sets from their function, which remains the same, but switch industries. Then you might have people who switch functions, and this could be a bigger change. Sales to marketing usually isn't as dramatic, but marketing to finance is often more of a dramatic function. And it can often be very hard to switch functions because you may be starting over in some ways. For some reinventors, they're switching geography, and sometimes they might be switching everything at once, which can be a little bit more challenging. So I wanted to talk through some examples of real people, and these are actually real people that I've coached. So in my day job, I run Alumni Career and Professional Development, and we're actually coaching a bunch of alumni who are changing career. So Keith's story, Keith was someone who actually went back to get his MBA around the age of 40. And he had really worked in a sales role for a manufacturing company and wanted to switch into equity research. But there were a couple challenges that Keith was facing. First was his age. He was 40, and it's kind of hard at times to start over. He also didn't really have any experience in finance. And so when Keith was thinking about this change, we started to look at his network, and one of the first things we thought about was the alumni network. He was in Chicago. There were 18,000 alumni there. That probably was going to be his strongest network when he was switching. In fact, what was really interesting, it turned out it wasn't his strongest network. In fact, his strongest network was a network of 15 people, not 18,000. It was a Bible study group that he was in with 15 other people. And they actually told him, tell us who you want to meet. We will get you any meeting you want, and we will put you in front of people. And that's how he was then able to switch careers. And it's interesting because I heard him, he was being interviewed on NPR recently about a transaction Warren Buffett had made. And for him, the transition has gone really, really well. He's been very successful in it. Our next story, Robert's story, had changed from being an engineer to an entrepreneur. He had studied engineering in college, he had started a PhD program, and was working as an engineer for a defense company. He really didn't like what he was doing. And what was interesting for him, he did very well in his job. What he didn't like was being evaluated by other people, even though his evaluations were very good. So he often complained about his job, and his wife, who actually was in a class with me at Harvard, said, well, why don't you think about changing? So his first change was moving into more of a sales role, essentially a sales engineering role that leveraged a lot of his experience in engineering. He liked it a little bit better, but still wasn't very happy. His father, who was an entrepreneur, said to him, do something, do anything. Life's too long to be doing something you don't like. As he thought about changing, his wife actually said, why don't you take a year off and figure out what it is you want to do? Luckily for them, she was a doctor, so they had a two-income household, and he was able to take a risk and start something new and start his own company. When he was thinking about what he wanted to do, he actually went back to his roots, and his roots were being an engineer. And he actually began designing and building equipment that videographers would use. And through the internet, he was able to open up a store and sell it online. About 2 years after he made this change, he was making about the same amount of money that he had been making in sales, which was quite good. And a couple years later, he was making well over what he had made in sales. And for him, what he really appreciated the most was a sense of autonomy. No one else was evaluating him. He was his own boss. He could set his own schedule. And that was something that was really important for him as he was thinking about reinventing his career. Another story, Jan. Jan is actually someone I used to work with in investment banking. And she had worked as a financial analyst out of undergraduate, did very well, went back to business school, rejoined the same firm as an associate, and did well, but really wasn't passionate about investment banking. What she was most interested in was writing, either for TV or for the movies. But for her to make that career in reinvention probably involved a couple of steps. Her function was investment banking and financial analysis. It wasn't writing. She wasn't in the industry. And more importantly, she was located in Chicago. She wasn't really in a big entertainment city like New York or Los Angeles. So as she thought about reinventing her career, she realized it might actually be a couple steps along the way. So one of the things she did was she first pivoted to a role at Walt Disney. It was really in their internal strategy group. It was still leveraging a lot of the same skills that she had as an investment banker, so doing financial analysis. And what was nice about this change was it allowed her to leverage her day skills, but it brought her closer geographically to where she wanted to be. She was now in Los Angeles, and it brought her closer industry-wise. She was then able to get on a project down the road, maybe a year down the road within the company, where she was doing work for the studio, and that was bringing her closer to her industry. One of the things that she did was then begin taking writing classes, because you have to write spec scripts, you have to get an agent. And so that was something she could do, on nights or on weekends. Not all that different from what Gauguin was doing. He first began painting on nights and weekends as well. She did well, wrote some good spec scripts, got an agent, and then went full-time into TV writing, where she's been for about 20 years. Interesting, I can think of at least 2 other alumni from Harvard who have made similar transitions. They reinvented their careers from the business side to writing for television as well. Finally, an even more dramatic example, going from a psychotherapist to a Tibetan Buddhist monk. And this is actually a real example in a book called Working Identity that I'm going to touch on later. And in this example, what at first seemed really strange to the psychotherapist, becoming a Buddhist monk, was something he never even thought about. But as he started to spend more time in the community, he really liked the people. And what at first seemed, wild in terms of becoming a Tibetan Buddhist monk is something that he actually reinvented into over a period of 6 or 7 years. So one of the questions that comes up a lot is, why do people reinvent their career? And again, if you've got the chance in the chat box, if you want to type in some of your thoughts as to why people might reinvent their career, we'll read through some of them before we go to the next slide. And so one person was typing in and saying, the economy might have changed. The job that you were in before might have gone away. And we've certainly seen that in a number of industries. If someone was a travel agent, for example, that business really largely disappeared 15 to 20 years ago with the internet. So sometimes the economy might have changed. Another person's typing in, you might be at a different stage in your life. And we'll see that as well. Sometimes people later in their careers may want to join a more mission-driven organization, and that may push part of that change as well. So keep typing in, and we'll go through some of the answers on the next slide. So one of the first things that comes up is, perhaps it wasn't your career choice to begin with. And we see this quite a bit, even at business schools and undergraduate. My parents told me I should be an engineer because engineers are always successful, or I should go to law school. One of the things we'll sometimes see at business schools is expectations. We'll always talk about, I took the job of my roommate's dreams. How could you say no to a phenomenal offer from an investment bank or a consulting firm? But if it's not what you should be doing, that's not the right move for you. Society's expectations as well. For some people, the economy has changed, and we talked about investment banking has gone through a sea change, and so the economy's changed. There were some interesting, a couple interesting articles at the end of the year. One was about Amazon Go, and you're going to start to see more cashierless stores. And so is that going to change? We've got 3.4 million cashiers in the United States. Or the first, Otto was just experimenting with the first 150-mile driverless delivery in Colorado. We have 4.2 million truck drivers in the United States. Is that going to change as well? Another reason people might change is different values. So again, they may join a mission-driven organization. Burnout. Burnout can be really big. Someone might be working in investment banking or trading, and burnout could be a factor in those industries as well. It could be a different time in your life. So re-entering the workforce, I've worked with a number of people who had taken a career break to have a family, and now we're re-entering the workforce. Sometimes encore careers. I want to do something, again, that's going to be more mission-driven. Ageism. I live in LA, so there's a lot of ageism in the entertainment industry. 30 years old for a comedy writer, you're already starting to see a little ageism. Same in acting. Same if you're a trader. It's uncommon to see traders in their late 40s. For some people, again, it's going to be a desire to find more meaning from their work as well. This is a very depressing slide about work dissatisfaction. And you can see some of the bullet points here. In general, workers are going to average 3.5 careers, probably 10 to 12 jobs during their lifetime. And again, interest in work is down about 18.9% according to the Conference Board. Job security is down. Interest in people at work is down. And then you see the last bullet point here. It's estimated that workplace stress costs approximately $200 billion a year in absenteeism to U.S. employers, lower productivity, staff turnover. And so, when you think about work dissatisfaction, the key is you don't want to end up like this. You don't want to end up like a character in The Scream. And so how do you avoid that? And how might you even think about reinventing your career? And so what we're going to talk about now is what are some of the steps to think about if you're wanting to reinvent your career. And one of the first places to start is going to be self-assessment. And I'm going to talk about one particular self-assessment called Career Leader, but I'll also talk about some exercises that you can do at home, including likes and dislikes, magazine rack exercise, describing your ideal day as well. And the key to think about when looking at self-assessment is it really helps mitigating, I didn't feel like I could turn this down, or I took the job of my friend's dreams. Long term, most people should probably be a little bit more afraid of being in the wrong job than in no job. And we've got a great quote from Confucius at the bottom: choose a job you love and you will never have to work a day in your life. So one of the assessments that a lot of business schools and universities use as well is called Career Leader. And Career Leader was actually created by two career coaches and psychologists at Harvard Business School. So Tim Butler and Jim Waldrop created it. And Career Leader really matches people up with career path matches. And I'm going to have a slide later on with the URL if you're interested in taking Career Leader. And we actually have a discount for Harvard alumni that are interested in taking it online. And so typically when someone takes Career Leader, they'll turn ahead to see, okay, well, how does the story end? What's the career path matches that match up for me? And typically those career path matches, the highest ones might be 90 and above, going all the way down to 0. But what's even more interesting than Career Leader, than the career path matches, are some of the component pieces of the assessment. In particular, Career Leader looks at interests, it also looks at motivators, and it looks at skills. And if we start with the first section with interests, Career Leader isn't actually asking, what are you good at? It's really asking, what do you like? We all spend, 8, 10, 12 hours a day at work. What are the activities that you're drawn towards that you'd want to do even if you weren't being paid? My colleague Csikszentmihalyi, talks about flow. And a lot of times when we're in flow, and you think of, let's say, Michael Jordan shooting a jump shot, or LeBron James, I guess I should be more current. When you're in the flow like that, you don't even think about time. You're so engaged in the activity that you just don't even think about time. And so typically, if you're going to have your high interests, you'll often be in the flow. So someone might have a high interest, let's say, of creative production. So, in LA where I live, creative production could be you're an actor, you're a writer, you're a director. In the business world, a creative production is often manifested in I'm in marketing and I create new products. I'm in advertising. I'm in PR. I might even be at a startup and I'm starting a new company. And so people who have high creative production, those might be careers that are going to be better suited. For some people, it might be influencing others. And that could be in a sales role where I'm influencing people to buy. But it could also be internal to a company. I'm influencing an investment committee to make an investment. Or I'm trying to persuade internal gatekeepers to move ahead with what I want to look at. And so this first part of Career Leader, identifying your interests, is very helpful when you're thinking about reinventing your career. And typically, interests don't really change much over time. When you look at the next section of Career Leader, it looks more at motivators. Unlike interests, your motivators will change, particularly at certain inflection points. So for some people, that inflection point could be personal. So if you look at something like, let's take lifestyle as an example. Lifestyle may not be as big of an issue when someone is younger, coming out of college, but it might be a bigger issue when they have a family. Or another inflection point could even be professional. So if you think about something like security, for an example, someone might have joined a couple of startups that both ran out of funding within a year and a half. When that person's looking at their next role, security must be much higher for them than it would have been 2 or 3 years ago. So Career Leader helps people think about motivators by using conjoint analysis. You essentially have to make choices. You can't have everything. And what's nice about it is you end up with a ranked order of what your choices are. And typically I'll have people focus on their top 5 motivators. And what's often helpful is the next step after taking something like Career Leader, I'll often have clients write down their top 3 interests, which you see on the previous side, and their top 5 motivators. And that can be helpful because that can identify 8 criteria that might be very important for someone who is reinventing their career. The next slide looks more at skills. And so Career Leader looks at a variety of skills, including power and influence, interpersonal effectiveness, management structure, strategic decision making. I'll be honest, I think this is probably the weakest part of the assessment. I think often it can be challenging for people to be objective about their skills. One of the things that's great about Career Leader is you can get 360-degree feedback, so sometimes other people may be a little bit more objective. But interestingly enough, when I talked with Tim and Jim, who had created the assessment, they said they don't weigh the skills as much. When you look at their algorithm for putting career path matches together, the interests and the motivators are weighted more than the skills are. When you think about how you might use an assessment like Career Leader if you're reinventing your career, really what you're looking for is what is a sweet spot where my motivators, my interests, and my skills intersect, because those are going to be the careers that are going to be better fits as you're thinking of reinventing. And if we look at a couple of examples here, let's say everything was congruent here. You wanted to be an artist. So, your motivators would have to be congruent. So financial gain probably isn't going to be the biggest driver for someone who wants to be an artist. Skill, you have to be able to draw. It's probably one of the big reasons why I wouldn't become an artist. And obviously you have to have an interest in art as well. But what if one of these were out of alignment? So let's say, for example, you can't draw. That's a problem if you want to be an artist. And so in a case like this, though, if the motivators were congruent, if the interests were congruent, perhaps you might be an art historian. So you're still going to be very close to that art world, which is going to satisfy the interest in the motivator. But as a historian, the ability to draw isn't as critical. Let's assume another one of these were out of alignment. Let's assume you wanted to make a living. So maybe financial gain was higher and you can't draw at that level. You might run a gallery. And so I think about one of my friends in Los Angeles, very talented art-wise, went to the School of the Art Institute in Chicago, but wasn't quite at that level. She and her husband run a very successful gallery, and for her it's been a great fit. It really keeps her very close to what she's passionate about, which is art. And they have openings, and she's around artists. And even though she's very talented, she may not be at that very, very high level skill-wise, but it keeps her very close to what interests her. So for alumni that are interested in taking Career Leader, I actually reached out to them a week ago, and they're able to offer alumni a $20 discount. So if this is something that's of interest to you, it's $75 to take. You can register at careerleader.com. And again, this is used at the business school. HBS uses this quite a bit. And we've got instructions if you wanted to take it online to get that discount. And again, I think for a lot of people, this is a great way to start that self-assessment process when you're thinking about reinventing your career. There's other assessments out there as well. So Myers-Briggs is an assessment that comes up quite a bit. And I think Myers-Briggs is great when you think about how do you take in information, how do you make decisions, for example, where do you get your energy from. It doesn't map as clearly onto careers as other assessments, but I think it's very valuable, particularly when working in teams. And you might be working with someone who's a little different than you. Another assessment that's out there is Strong Campbell. And Strong Campbell is an assessment often used. They look at a hexagon in terms of career path matches, and it'll look at things like artistic versus realistic. And there's a couple other assessments out there as well that can be helpful for people that are reinventing their career. But we also have some other exercises that you can do at home that you don't have to pay for. So I think one of the exercises that I typically will recommend to people that are looking to reinvent their career is a likes and dislikes exercise. And this can often be a very cathartic exercise for people. And essentially what I like people to do in this exercise is to disaggregate. It's very rare that we like or dislike our jobs in their entirety. There's certain things we like, there's certain things we don't like. And so typically I'll have people start with their resume and work backwards. So, you know, in your most recent job, you really want to break it down. And for some people, you might have been at the same company for 10 years, but you've had 3 different roles. You want to look at each role separately. And in some industries, you might be in a very project-driven or client-driven business. So let's say you were a consultant and you worked on 10 different engagements. I would want you to look at each engagement separately because one engagement can be very different from another. And so when you think about the particular engagement or role you're in, you essentially want to disaggregate. So think about what a typical week is like. So for instance, you might say, I spend 10 hours a week in a meeting. I would say, great, but break that down even further. So you might say, well, I spend an hour a week in a meeting with my boss. I don't like it. He's not very focused when I meet with him. I don't find it to be very useful. It's not the most valuable hour of my week. But then you might be in meetings 4 hours a week with your direct reports, and you might say, I love those meetings. I get to coach them. I get to mentor them. And in fact, that was one of the interests that comes up in Career Leader. Those are the meetings I love the most. So that's important to know. Or you might say, I spend 5 hours of meetings a week with our clients and customers. I love that. It gets me outside of the building. I learn about other companies and other industries. Or I spend 2 hours a week in meetings with my peers, and I learn what's happening in other parts of the company. You might say, I spend 5 hours a week in an Excel spreadsheet, and I don't like it. I'm not interacting with people. In addition to the different activities that you might be doing in a week, also talk about other things. So for instance, include your commute. I spend 3 hours a day commuting in my car in LA, and I don't like it. Or I spend 20 minutes on the T, and it's okay, I can read. Think about hours worked. Think about office space. So it might be I work in an open office environment and I really like it, I get to interact. Or I work in an open office environment and I don't like it because I can't think very deeply. Think about things like dress. I've got to put on a suit and tie, I like it or I don't like it. Think about culture. Is it a very formal culture? Is it an informal culture? And you really want to be outspoken. You want to write down memories, you want to write down reactions, and essentially you're looking for patterns. With some clients, when we do this exercise, they'll actually go back and say, you know, what I loved the most when I was working was an internship I had 15 years ago or a summer job. And then we'll start to explore that. Why did you like that? What's missing from that? So I've got, an example here of someone who had done a likes and dislikes. So his commute, he liked. It was 20 to 30 minutes on the subway. He enjoyed being able to read. One of the things he didn't like was being alone in my office. He said I detested it. Sitting in my office alone all day wasn't something really interesting. The interaction, and this is actually someone who was working as a lawyer. Everyone is in fear all the time. Rare for normal human interaction. You look a little bit like BlackBerry, terrorizing. The idea of coming in late at night is a big source of stress. Every morning dread what is coming overnight and needing to react to it. Or when you look at hours, even when the hours aren't bad, it's still very stressful, fearing an assignment. At the very end, 190 plus hours is just brutal, waiting for it to end. And so again, when you kind of go through an example like that, it can be very cathartic and it helps to sort of surface. And the big thing you're really looking for are what are the patterns that emerge. Another exercise that I like people to do is the magazine rack exercise. And this is getting harder because we don't tend to have as many bookstores. There is a thing called a library that you can go to where they'll have a lot of magazines as well. And what I like people to do in this exercise, and this is really much more about exploration. So you might go into a bookstore and say, look, what magazines draw me in? So for me, I love travel. So I'll go to a travel magazine that I may not subscribe to and I'll look at articles or I'll look at advertisements and I'll think about that. So, something that could be of interest down the road is, would I want to work for a travel company? Would that be something that would be interesting? Or maybe you're drawn to sports. What I like people to do is to keep a running list of what are the things that draw them in. And I think what's nice about this is sometimes people know they want to reinvent and do something different, but they're not quite sure what it is. And this can be a great and a fun way to ideate about what else is out there. Some other exercises, there's a 100 jobs exercise, and that was also an exercise created by the creators of Career Leader. What's very nice about this exercise is it's very broad. It's not so business focused. Another great exercise is to write down or journal, how would you describe your ideal day? What would you be doing? Who would you be interacting with? Are you interacting internally or are you interacting externally with customers? Or who do you admire and why? People might admire an entrepreneur who started something from scratch, and that may help them think about what's next. Would I want to start a company? Would I want to create a company? Or maybe you're a concentric circle out from that. You don't want to start a company, but you want to join a startup because you want to still be closer to that environment. And so these are just great exercises you could do at home to help you think through a little bit more, how might you reinvent? When you think about reinventing, and I've got a model up here, kind of a 9-square model about career shifting. And what's interesting is when you see the shaded area in the bottom left, those are typically going to be the areas where participants find the quickest success. So I might reinvent, but it may be less dramatic. I'm in the same job, same industry, but it's a different company. And so those are going to be easier reinventions. As you go to the top right corner, different job, different industry, that's a bigger reinvention. You may not even be able to do that in one step. When you think a little bit about Gauguin as an example, he didn't go overnight from working in a bank to being an artist. He had to learn skills, he had to take time. He shifted along the way. It may not be all at once if it's more of a radical reinvention. One thing that can be helpful is doing a skills inventory or a skills sort matrix. So thinking about what are skills, if you look at the bottom left, burnout skills. So burnout skills might be skills you do well, but you don't enjoy using. If we go back to the example of the person who changed, Jan, from being an investment banker to being a TV writer, her burnout skill was financial analysis. She did it really well. She'd been in banking, but she didn't enjoy using it. If you looked in the top right corner, her developmental skill was writing. It's something she enjoyed, but she didn't do well. So she needed to take classes. She needed to write spec scripts. She needed to get feedback. She needed to get better at it. When she became better at it, it moved to the top left corner. It was now a motivated skill. She did it well. She enjoyed using it. And so you can just see here, motivated skills are often going to be your transferable skills, skills that you'd prefer to use. Your burnout skills will essentially be your transitional skills. You might not want to use them, but they could be of big interest to target employers and may pave the way for your desired shift. And so again, you're essentially moving from the bottom left corner to the top right corner, and then you're going to move to the top left corner. And one thing to keep in mind when you're thinking about, moving from burnout skills to developmental skills to motivated skills, for some people, they may be going back to school to learn those developmental skills. But increasingly, you don't have to. You can do it by taking a MOOC, an online course, where you can learn some of those skills, but you're not giving up your day job. Or you could maybe get some of those skills by volunteering for a nonprofit or just by learning on your own. So you think of something like lynda.com, where you can learn some of these skills on your own without giving up your day job or without paying a huge tuition bill. So what's nice about it is there are more ways to pick up these skills today than might have been out there before. When you think about setting goals, you want to set SMART goals, so things that are specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound. But you probably have to dig a little bit deeper. How are you going to know if your goal is realistic and attainable? And so you'll essentially want to do a feasibility analysis. You'll want to research your desired career shift when you're reinventing. I think one of the most important things is to talk to those doing the job. And more importantly, talk to those who made the same career shift. They're often going to be very happy to meet with you, to talk with you, to give you feedback, because often it can be a challenging process, and so they're happy to probably reach out and help other people who are making a career shift. So I can think of one alum from Harvard who had moved from being a lawyer to working at a hedge fund. And his friends spent a weekend with him, trained him, so he interviewed well for the hedge fund, and he's done terrifically well. So he's someone who's going to be very open to career shifters. You need to talk to many people. It may be 8 to 10 initially. I think one of the great things to do when you're looking at reinventing and making a bigger shift is Google job descriptions. I often have people put together 10 or 12 job descriptions into a Word document and start to look at what are the skills that are pretty universal that they're looking for? What are the experiences? And when you don't have them, start to think through how will you get them? I think one of the other tremendously valuable things is look at LinkedIn profiles. You can look at people who made a similar shift. How did they do it? Did they have to put in an intermediate step? So when going from investment banking to TV writing, there were some intermediate steps along the way. How do you do that? And so I think LinkedIn profiles are great. And one of the great functionalities within LinkedIn is you can go into the advanced search and you can say, I'm looking for someone who might have started their career on Wall Street, but now is working for an entertainment company. And you can put in specific company names and come up with profiles and start to look at those profiles. So that can be very helpful. You can essentially see people's career arcs, which can be really interesting. When you think more about that feasibility analysis, you want to ask questions. Why am I seeking this shift? Is this shift realistic or attainable? And again, one of the things that you don't see when you take self-assessment, and this is one of the weaknesses of self-assessment, they're not necessarily realistic about how open is that career reinvention going to be to you at a particular age. I'm 52. If I wanted to go into investment banking now and I didn't have that background, is that really realistic? Also, do you have support to make that change? In that gap analysis, what might be some of the barriers you're going to have to overcome? What's missing from my background? Where are the knowledge and experience gaps? Can I get them can I learn on my own? Can I take a MOOC? Can I go to lynda.com and learn those skills? How do I close those gaps? Also, are there people that can help me? What are some of the development transitional activities I need to be doing? And then finally thinking through, is this realistically achievable in a single step? Or might it be 2 or 3 steps along the way if it's going to be a more dramatic career reinvention? And then also think about your current organization. Let's say you wanted to switch job functions, which can be a more dramatic career reinvention. I'll typically tell people, think through, can you do that in your current organization? And the reason that that's important is switching functions is challenging, but if you're doing it within your current organization, you have certain advantages. You have institutional knowledge about the organization. You have a network within the organization, people who might be willing to take a chance on you. You've got credibility. So it may be easier to make that functional change within your organization versus going to a new organization. It's important to look within your organization. Have people made that change? If I think of a company like GE, for example, they're very more flexible about moving people from one function to another. So that could be a company or a culture that's more open to it. But you essentially have to ask those questions. Are there people who've been able to make those changes? The one other piece that we're going to touch on next is networking. And networking is important in any job search. It's even more important when people are reinventing their careers. And one of the reasons that networking is so important is when people are looking to reinvent their careers, many of those traditional gatekeepers, like HR professionals or executive recruiters, they're risk averse. They're essentially there to screen out people who might be reinventing their careers. And this isn't to say that you'll never have to go through those people, whether it's an HR professional or an executive recruiter, but you don't want to go through them initially because they're going to be more risk averse. You're going to want to network within the company, network within the industry. You're going to try to maybe network and talk to people who've changed careers or are open to career changers. You're going to try to get advocates within the organization that will listen to your story. And often those advocates are going to be people who came through that same network. So they may be other Harvard alumni. They're willing to meet with another alum. They will listen to your story in a way that someone else 2 or 3 circles away may not. And so you're often going to start with them. And then if you are going to go through HR, you're going to want those advocates to hand you off to HR versus you going on your own. The other reason why networking is so important is most people have 250 to 500 contacts, and you're really only looking to connect with the 1 or 2 contacts who can help you the most. So you want to be very comfortable talking about your career invention. You want to be very comfortable telling your story. You want it to come up very naturally in conversation. The other thing that's really important in networking is we often have tunnel vision. We often think, the only people I can network with is, from a really wide network where there's 100,000, 200,000 people, and that's great. But the one thing I continually hear back from alumni that are reinventing their careers is the people who I thought were going to be most helpful to me weren't, and the people who I didn't even know at the beginning of this career reinvention were the ones who were most helpful. Radical career reinventors are going to have to go outside of their normal network and their normal circles when they're reinventing. It's often going to be important to create a board of advisors, people who know you well, who can encourage you, and who can also give you candid feedback as you're making a change like this. Why would a stranger help? A number of different ways. It could be reciprocity, it could be mentoring, it could be affinity, it could be talent, it could be connection. So as an example, when I was an undergraduate at Harvard, I was able to get a work permit, and I worked in London 2 summers. And I reached out to several alumni in the network who were, they were 20, 30 years out of Harvard. I was an undergraduate, and they helped me as well. And I think we're getting an announcement from the library. So if you're not aware, we are in the middle of a huge snowstorm here in Cambridge. We've got about 12 to 15 inches of snow. So luckily we have 15 minutes left, which will work out perfectly with the end of the webinar. So if we get another announcement, don't be worried about it. But when you think about reaching out, I had reached out to an alum who was essentially running all of JP Morgan Chase in Europe. I knew nothing about banking. This alum gave me 3 hours of his time. And he was just really happy to, essentially he was mentoring me, and we were from the same network, and he was happy to give me that time. And there were probably people who worked at the bank who couldn't even get in front of this person. So strangers will help for a number of reasons. Contact base, we've written here just a number of people in networks to think through. It could be classmates, it could be alumni. Think through organizations. It could be professional organizations, religious organizations, community organizations, hobbies, clubs, friends, family. Some true examples. One alum who I knew got into a fender bender on the 101 in Silicon Valley. She was looking to do finance roles for a startup and was looking at some consulting opportunities. The woman she got into a fender bender with was actually looking for someone to help. She was starting a company and got a great consulting opportunity just getting into a fender bender. It's probably not the most economical way to network, and we don't recommend doing this if you're driving a Prius, but really what you want to look at is every opportunity. And even if I think about, another example I have here is a hairdresser. There was another client I was working with who had worked in corporate at McDonald's, and she had left the workforce to raise a family, and about 10 years later she was looking to go back into the workforce. She still went to the same hairdresser that was across the street from McDonald's corporate headquarters to get her hair dressed. She was talking to the hairdresser that she was thinking of entering the workforce, and the hairdresser said, "Give me your resume." And she said, "No, come on, what are you going to do?" She goes, "I cut the hair of all these other executives at McDonald's. I will float your resume to them." That's how she actually re-entered the workforce. So you really want to look at every opportunity as a way to do this. Networking protocol, big things to think about. Every contact is evaluative. If I walk into a Starbucks, I have an opinion about the person helping me in 10 seconds. Are they friendly? Are they unfriendly? Do they know what they're doing? Do they not? Are they fast? Are they slow? And it's very hard to change that initial opinion. And networking is no different, even when you're in the same network. So even if it's with another Harvard alum, you're still being evaluated. The other really important thing is be open-minded. Sometimes people have tunnel vision when they're reinventing, and I'm just looking for someone who's going to hire me, but don't have tunnel vision. That person you meet, it could be your next job, but it could be your second job down the road. That person could become a friend, a mentor, a reference, a vendor, a client. They could even be the person that invests in the company that you start 10 years from now. And then also think, what are your short-term goals? Sure, a goal might be I want to, have someone hire me so I can reinvent, but you're also trying to learn. You're trying to get information, referrals, assistance, ideas, lead generation, strategy. And then always thank your contact and follow up. The final thing that we want to talk about, and this is really interesting, I'm going to talk about a book called Working Identity. And the author is actually Herminia Ibarra, who's actually a professor at London Business School. She takes a very different approach to career reinvention. She doesn't put as much weight on taking self-assessments. She thinks you really have to act into a new way of thinking. And what's interesting, and we've got a couple of bullet points here. She says you can't really discover yourself by introspection, but you have to act into a new way of thinking and being. You have to try different paths. So she's a big advocate of experiment. One of the things she also says is stop trying to find your one true self. We may have multiple identities. When we looked at that slide of Arnold Schwarzenegger, he's a businessman, he was a politician, he's a TV host, he was Mr. Universe. We have or you think of Michael Bloomberg, was the mayor of New York, started a company, Bloomberg as an entrepreneur, was a partner at Salomon Brothers. There is often more than our one true self. Also, allow yourself a period in transition. You may oscillate between holding on and letting go. So much of our own identity is wrapped up in our working identity. It's going to be very common to feel uncomfortable, and sometimes it's going to be better to live the contradictions rather than come to a premature resolution. A couple more slides. Sometimes resist the temptation to start by making a big decision. It may not come in one fell swoop, so that's okay. It may be a little bit of a crooked path. Don't just focus on the work. So when we think about the psychotherapist who became a Tibetan Buddhist monk, he really focused on the people. He loved that community, And that's really what helped him reinvent his career. He wasn't just looking at the work. Another point she brings up is identifying projects that can help. Can you learn a new skill set? Will that allow you to get into a new career? So look for other opportunities as well. She also says, don't wait for a cataclysmic moment when the truth is revealed. Epiphanies are hard. It's very rare that the clouds part, light comes streaming through, and we figure out what it is we want to do next. Major career transitions can take 3 to 5 years. And finally, step back, but not for too long. When you get stuck and are short on insight, it may be okay to step back. I've got some recommended books here. These are all great books. You can see Working Identity by Herminia Ibarra. One of the other great books, Getting Unstuck by Tim Butler, who was one of the creators of Career Leader. And the very first book, Do What You Are, by Daniel Tiger and Barbara Barron, that actually focuses on the Myers-Briggs. And then Flow is a great book when you think about what is it like to be in the flow. So we're getting a couple questions here, and I know we have 9 minutes, and hopefully Widener will let us stay till the very end. So we're going to go through a couple of questions. One of the questions was actually about how do you combat ageism in the workforce? And I get asked this question a lot, and ageism is definitely there. And what's interesting, I think if you look at the, it might even be the EEOC, ageism can even start at the age of 40 and above, where people can, it can even be a legal issue. Here's the thing. No one's ever going to say it because they're going to be sued. And we ultimately have no control over our age. So, what I tell people, like on resumes as an example. So I don't put anymore the year I graduated Harvard, but I have to put years of job experience because that'll raise a flag. In the end, someone's going to figure out how old I am. If they couldn't, would you really want to be working for someone who really couldn't figure out relatively how old you are? And focus on things you have control over. You have control over energy. You have control over interest. You have control over how well you prepped. And you have control over how you do in the interview. Focus on things you have control over. Don't worry about the things that you don't have control over. And think through what are going to be people that are going to be more open if age is an issue. So someone who's relatively your age might be more open. Someone who's 20 years younger may not. Sometimes you'll see smaller companies may be more open to someone who has more experience because they don't have the bandwidth to train you. So start to think through where are you getting a better reception and focus on those opportunities if age is an issue. But again, there's a lot of things we can't control, and you don't want to focus on those as well. We also had, how do you make career transitions when you're unemployed or have limited resources? And I'll work with a lot of clients who are between jobs. And I think the biggest thing is don't get defensive about that. It was a much bigger issue 20, 25 years ago where it felt like, it was a mark against you. It's really not an issue anymore. And I think the big thing to talk about if you're not working is one, again, be positive. You have control over your attitude. 2, focus on what you're doing. So often when I'm working with clients who aren't working, we'll have them talk about, I'm doing an interesting project for this company. Here's what I'm learning. Or I'm taking a MOOC and I'm learning this new skill set. Focus on positive things you're doing. Don't get defensive about that. We're just checking here if we have any other questions coming in the queue. Let's see if we've got anything else coming in. So we've got about making ageism was one of the questions that came up. Job security, constant layoffs. And again, if there's a layoff, and typically that may come up in interviews, big thing is don't get defensive. Don't talk negatively about the company. Often it's very helpful. Tell me what were the positives there. I learned to do X, Y, Z, or I did a great project like this. When you talk about the layoff, again, don't get negative. You might even be more matter of fact. As you know, the industry is going under a lot of pressure. At our company, we cut back our workforce by 15%, including me. But I still have these great skill sets. And then the most important thing is transition to why you're interested in that new company and that new opportunity. So I know that we're coming up on the end of the hour here, so I want to be respectful as we wrap up. We will be sending out a survey to you next week. And one of the things that we're looking for in the survey is we want to get your feedback. As we start to do more of these webinars, tell us what other topics or subjects would be interesting to you so we can cover that. And you'll get that next week. The other thing is this has been recorded, and we will be posting the recording on the HAA website in about 2 weeks. So you can watch this again in about 2 weeks when we finally get it posted. And finally, a big thank you. As I said before, there is a huge, wicked, nasty nor'easter that is hitting Cambridge right now. And I just want to send a very big thank you to everyone here at Hauser Studios, to Patrick and Joe who helped support this and came in through the snow. And also for Chris and Moira from HAA who came here today. And we will see you. So remember, stay engaged with Harvard, whether it's online or in your local club. Thank you very much.